I thought you got some very elegant videos from Kavita. I've been asked to speak about donor preparation and suturing, and I'd like to acknowledge Ashish and Asim's help with some of the slides. Of course, in terms of donor preparation, remember that the way that we cut the donor is different from the way we cut the recipient. You're refining the donor from the endothelium and you're cutting the recipient from the epithelium. So that is one of the reasons that you have that disparity, and that's the reason we tend to have sometimes an occasional graft-host disparity. There are broadly two different types of trephines. I think he touched upon it briefly, but earlier we were using the metal trephines. Now I use them only for marking the extent of the dissection. It helps you also for planning patch grafts also, but majority of them we have shifted to disposable trephine. They're quite widely available now from Madhu Instruments, and the quality is also actually quite good. Remember that with the metal trephines, if you're using it tends to get blunt with usage. There is an issue with depth assessment occasionally and centration, and you can have a bit of a tilt. Remember, if you got a blunt trephine, you will never get a complete smooth perpendicular cut. In the suction trephine, it's important that you center it well. Some of them have crosshairs, and that helps you to center the trephination both on the donor and the recipient. And remember that you can have a tendency to undercut if you're using suction trephines. This is what Kavita had shown, but what I would probably like to emphasize is more with respect to the donor, and these are suction trephines that are available. They have marks, so you can actually mark these 4 cardinal sutures and the central part. So if you mark the center of your cornea, you basically can then align your 4 cardinal sutures along with this. This works quite good. There are of course other types of manual trephinations, but in terms of getting a good sharp cut, most of them these kind of trephines actually work well. They are available in India both from Coronet and Cortina now. The corneal punch basically includes a cutting block with a vertical piston assembly with the cutting edge. This was the traditional one in which most of us have learned, at least our keratoplasties. And the Iowa PK punch is the most commonly one used, and it's basically with a spring activated piston, and it cuts donor graft through the posterior surface, that is from the endothelium. Broadly, this is the different parts. This is the piston that you actually press down with your hand, and this is basically a guard that doesn't allow it to go beyond a certain depth. This is where you would actually attach the trephine. You can actually unscrew the whole assembly and then add in your trephine, but remember that these have limits. Usually you cannot go beyond about 9, sometimes 9.5 if you're lucky. So anything beyond 10 you would probably need to do a manual trephination on most trephination systems. This is the F is basically the Teflon block in which you place the cornea. There are of course different types. The Troutman punch, named after Dr. Troutman, also comes with a Teflon block. This is slightly different. The assembly is also slightly different. This corneal donor punch, not commonly used, but is still used by some traditional corneal surgeons. And the Lieberman punch has been described. It's basically in which the manual force is replaced with a drop weight, and it basically tends to give slightly accurate more cuts. It is basically a gravity action like a guillotine, if you know the French Revolution, but not commonly used either. This is what is most of us we use, and it's available from Indian manufacturers. The endothelial punch and the Iowa punch both work reasonably well, but an important point is to make sure that the Teflon block is absolutely dry before you place the cornea. Any size of trephine can be basically fitted on most of the corneas. You need to screw it in, and some of them have different methods of making sure that the trephine fits. Important that you examine the trephine under the microscope before you put it in. Occasionally, because of usage, you can have areas of rust. You can have chips that will give you very, very irregular cuts, and then you would have a problem when you're actually removing the corneoscleral rim. The Hana punch is probably the most accurate in terms of reproducibility. I found that to be the best, but it is an expensive proposition. Costs about $12,000 for the donor and the recipient. It's totally steel, and it's high grade steel. Is actually quite nice. Cuts the cornea. Also, you have an option of using an artificial anterior chamber to cut it from the epithelial side, and uses limbal fixation. And the reason, of course, you have donor and recipient, you can cut from the same side, so the matching of the donor and the recipient is a lot better. This is how it looks, and if you look, this has a vacuum also, but it has multiple points. You basically mark the five points, as I mentioned, the central part and the 4 cardinal sutures, and it has a blade which is also made of steel, disposable, and this is basically fitted in. It can give you multiple various different types of cut if you ask them for it, but in terms of reproducibility, and because it's all steel, it is actually quite good. The donor cornea is basically put on the artificial anterior chamber if you want, and you can cut it similarly to the donor and the recipient, and you get quite nice cuts. There have been actually studies published comparing the HANA trephine with other trephines, and they found that to be more predictable. This is important part. Remember, the cutting block needs to be replaced if you use it for at least about 50 to 70 keratoplasties. Because of the blade, you would get marks, and that can cause a bit of slippage. So examine the Teflon block along with the blade, and it's not too expensive. It's only about 150 rupees. You can get a new Teflon block quite easily. There were earlier blocks made of nylon, polycarbonate and paraffin, not commonly used. This is important because since it is plastic, any bit of MK or U-Sol or Lipo-C, make sure you tap the graft down on a cotton sponge. Just hold it vertical, all of it drains out. Make sure that the Teflon block is dry before you apply the suction. In terms of the donor preparation, I prefer to prepare, at least for penetrating keratoplasties, and I think both Kavita and Ashish would agree that you would probably prepare the donor first. You can of course make the recipient first, but sometimes if you've had a problem and you want the donor fast, and you've had some complication, then you need to suture it in. One way of actually just keeping your being safe is to not cut the whole recipient completely, just keep it like a flap. And you get the donor ready. So in case there is some increased intraocular pressure or there is vitreous presenting, you won't need a quick a closed chamber. You can use that flap and basically resuture the recipient. The graft host disparity depends on the planned host. Actually, there are some studies done even on the graft host disparity, but usually, as was mentioned in a previous slide, anything beyond 8.59, you're looking at higher chances of vascularization and graft rejection. Smaller tends to be causing more astigmatism. Between and 7, most of aphakic patients you would oversize by about 0.5. Phakic and pseudophakic, 0.25 is now available from Madhu Instruments, but sometimes you get a bit of a gap and you do get wound leakage. So 0.5 is actually quite safe and quite standard in terms of oversizing. Remember that 0.5 oversizing can induce a myopia about +4 unless your suturing is very, very tight. And with about 7.5 or 0.25 oversize does not use any refractive error, and that's the reason it's the preferred graft size. So between 7.5 and 8, you can get good refractive results, especially even with same size grafts in keratoconus. Grafts smaller, of course, would give a lot of hyperopia because of a flat cornea. Remember that you need to try and imagine what the patient's cornea would be after surgery, and try and make it as natural as possible, at least intraoperatively. Make sure when you're finishing up, if you find it too flat, it's not a bad idea to just, if you have spare cornea available, to also make sure that it's not too flat in terms of the graft shape. Keratoconus, there have been some descriptions of using slightly smaller graft host disparity, 0.25 smaller, but I prefer to routinely use same size grafts, because if at least in penetrating keratoplasty where there's an issue of wound leakage and shallow anterior chamber, it's a good idea to just go with the same size grafts, and then you can take care of the myopia also. If I mentioned, you need to make it about 0.5 larger. There are of course different ways of cutting the donor. If you have whole globe, I know whole globe excision is still done in some parts, you would need a handheld or suction trephine. The globe is actually fixated, and then you do cut it with plastic or a standard trephine. Slightly more difficult to do, but if you are in institutes or you are practicing in getting it directly from the eye bank, most times you would get a corneoscleral button in any of the storage media, and then it makes life a lot more easier. I've actually never cut whole globe, at least in my cornea practice. Remember that donor graft cut from the endothelial side are probably about 0.2 smaller than those cut from the epithelial side, and that is the reason for the disparity. This I think I would cover. I would just chuck over this, but remember that when you're doing a trephination, how do you know that it's actually cut through? You would hear a give or a slight sound on the Teflon block when the blade goes through, and a good way of actually confirming it is to keep the trephine in place and use a colibri forceps to make sure that you can move the corneoscleral rim. Then you got a free cut, and then very gently put in viscoelastic so that when you're removing the trephine, the whole thing doesn't come off. So you got to separate the cut cornea from the corneoscleral rim. Make sure you put viscoelastic at all points. It's not a bad idea to use visco. Most of the, at least for penetrating keratoplasties, I prefer to use a good dispersive viscoelastic. Put that on the cornea when you're actually doing the punching. On the endothelial side, you don't need it on the epithelial side. There are of course different types of punch. I usually mention need to have a sharp vertical cut. This is just basically just brought down. I also mentioned that you can do it with a laser. Now there are of course some advantages of doing with the laser in terms of getting good precision. There's no slippage, and it basically creates very good smooth perpendicular edges. Improve the optical performance also after keratoplasty. The femtosecond laser, there are of course different machines available. You can get a perfect donor recipient fit. You can, if you want, oversized too, but femtosecond laser in terms of the procedure itself does maybe make it longer than you would like. This is a slide from our study that we had done about 6 years back, where we found that if the calibration of the cornea is actually done, you can get very good vertical cuts. There are of course different shapes that you can get with the femtosecond laser. The vertical, the step ladder pattern. This basically is used for pseudophakic bullous keratopathy because you want more endothelium. The other method is actually the mushroom method, where you use this for predominantly keratoconus, where you want the healthy endothelium to be maintained. The zigzag and the Christmas tree pattern has also been used. It basically gives a longer area of contact between the donor and the recipient, and what that does is basically that we now know from studies that the burst pressure is best basically with the top hat or the zigzag model. So if you're using a femtosecond laser, these would be the preferred method. We published a study in AJO almost about maybe now 5 years back, where we looked at outcomes of the femto-PK in about 8 eyes, and in terms of astigmatism you can actually do improve it, but remember that you still need to put in sutures. Maybe with the femto-LK that advantage is probably slightly more. In terms of the post-op results, you can see that this is an ASOCT picture showing that at the edge there is a lot more scarring than you would normally find in a standard PK, and the alignment both anterior and posterior is actually quite looks very good, and this can basically reduce the astigmatism. We did scanning electron microscopy comparing the HANA, which is on your right, and then the femtosecond. You can make out the tags, so it can actually match and sometimes exceed the cut that you would find with the HANA or the femtosecond. There is actually very minimal endothelial damage when you're using the femtosecond, and these are just pictures of the endothelium from a wet lab that we did that shows that while using the cut, there is actually very minimal endothelial damage. Just a short video about how it is done. This is just an animation with the femto-PK. You using different lengths on the anterior and the posterior part. This is what I was mentioning as the top hat model, where the anterior cut is slightly shorter than the posterior cut. This gives a longer area of apposition between the recipient and the donor, and basically then helps you in getting good apposition. This is then similarly done on the recipient, and then you got the donor and recipient being made quite similar in the shape itself. The laser procedure does tend to take longer. You need to remember that the energy used for LASIK is different from the energy you would use for keratoplasty. After you've cut the button, make sure you put a drop of BSS or storage medium. Visco is placed on the endothelium. I prefer to use a good dispersive, and during surgery in the recipient and while you're doing the suturing, and basically you cover it up with moistened glass and wait till the recipient bed is ready. Should I continue on to suturing techniques? Okay. This is an important part because this, I guess, differentiates the men from the boys or the ladies from the girls in terms of how well you actually get them to suture. We do mark the host cornea centrally and the recipient cornea. So if you mark the central of the cornea on the recipient, you try and match that, and then I mentioned on the HANA or a standard suction Trifine, you have 4 points which you can mark and then help you with the suturing. Measure the central point of the host cornea. This marking is essential. So remember that if you think about it as a pie or a pizza, you need to make it into a perfect 8 pieces before you go ahead with the second part. So this is the central part, and you can use different markers. I prefer to use a 16 RK because I at least in most non-inflammatory cases, I do a double continuous with an 8-0. 8-bite suture, and the first placement is of course done at 12, then diametrically opposite, that is about 180, and I would think probably the and there's only whenever you're removing sutures, important point that in the post-op follow-up, the knot does not pass through the graft-host junction because that can sometimes rip the graft-host junction, so you need to be careful. Just a video of how interrupted sutures is done. I think the important point is the first. I prefer to use the Polax forceps for the first bite. Basically, it helps you center it. The second suture, as I was mentioning, is the important part that basically divides the cornea into two, and this basically helps to plan further. Now, in this is actually make sure that the antechamber is well formed at all times. You need to refill with viscoelastic, preferably dispersive. But at the end of the surgery, you remove all of it. As you can make out that I've done a 16 RK mark, and at the end of the procedure, make sure that you do a bit of a keratometry. I do prefer to do intraoperative keratometry just to make sure that we've got the astigmatism right. It's more important in the interrupted sutures because they would require a lot more of adjustment post-operatively. And at the make sure you got a very good wound seal, because in a PK and especially in femtosecond, it can be quite unforgiving if you've not done a good suturing, and this is what I basically use intraoperatively, and this you can either replace the suture for flatter corneas, or you can put in additional sutures too. That works quite well. When you're talking about single continuous, it basically provides early visual rehabilitation. Adjustment is possible without a removal, and that's done in about 3 to 4 weeks post-op, and multiple adjustments are possible. It does take a bit more of skill than interrupted, I would say, but when you remove them, you got to remove all of it. You cannot remove parts of it. You can do a combined procedure where you basically do continuous and interrupted. The continuous maintains the wound if interrupted is removed. So if you've done a continuous and interrupted, you remove the interrupted first and then remove the continuous later. In the double continuous, what I prefer to do is basically go with an 8-bite with two 8-bite sutures on both sides, and the advantage with this is you can remove one, wait for the change in astigmatism, and then if required do further corrections. This is how I do it, and this is in a patient with penetrating keratoplasty where, in DALK, just to demonstrate the technique. So you put in the 4 cardinal sutures first, as you would normally do, and then you would basically start with the continuous suturing. The continuous suture, you can basically start at about 12, and then you go around at alternate bites. Once you do that, first round is completed. Make sure you tighten that and leave it, but don't do a final tie. Just put 3 loop suture and leave it, just like you would do for a releasable suture in glaucoma. And then you go around with the second one. Once you've done that, you cut both the sutures and then do the suture adjustment to make sure the suture tension is equal all around the whole extent of the corneal graft host junction. I would then basically remove the the interrupted sutures which I had applied earlier. I do an keratometry again for interrupted sutures. It's a lot more easier to actually check the keratometry for continuous sutures, because you don't need to replace and add sutures. You basically just need to adjust, and that is in at least in non-inflammatory diseases. That's my preferred way of actually doing it. Of course, there are multiple advantages and disadvantages, but broadly, we do know for double continuous sutures, the sutures in astigmatism is less than the sutures in astigmatism for interrupted sutures. I find it a lot more difficult to manage the interrupted astigmatism, because the post-op shift every time you remove a suture is a lot more. Continuous sutures, if you've got it right initially, you can basically manage that post-operatively. In case after all suture removal, 9 months, 1 year later, you find there's a lot of irregular astigmatism, I do something called a graft resuture, where I basically freshen the edges at about 80 to 90% and redo a continuous suturing. So that basically helps to readjust the astigmatism. It works pretty well in most cases, and if you're doing it for keratoconus, you can readjust the astigmatism also. Just a video to show how it looks post-op. Most of them can notice a difference almost immediately. You can get a bit of scarring along the edges, and this patient is about 6 months post-op. Just some of our patients who've done well over the years, and thank you for your attention.